do you effectively communicate change across your team or organization? This can be a little bit tricky, especially as you think about communication as a tool to keep your team engaged and focused when moving through a change project or a change initiative. I've got 3 lessons that I've learned working with Fortune 100 executives all over the world, leading and executing change, that I think might help. Let's get it. It's time to make change happen in your team or organization. But how do you effectively communicate that change? And how do you sustain effective communication through the life of the change, throughout the entire change journey? And what are the most critical components of a communication strategy? Well, by the end of this video, you'll not only be able to answer all of those questions, but you'll also be armed with 3 lessons that I've learned working with Fortune 100 executives all over the world going through change. From how to effectively identify success criteria, to the importance of consistency and frequency, and finally, the most important lesson that is too often forgotten and often causes the demise of change success. So before we dive into the 3 lessons, let's talk about what it means to create a communication strategy. What goes into that strategy? Well, overall, it's a roadmap to define how communication is going to be made throughout the team or the organization. Let me go through a few of the most important elements of a really holistic communication strategy. Number 1, the what and the why. Now, that includes things like the vision or the reason for making the change, the success criteria, the key milestones, progress tracking, risks to that progress or to the success of the change, help requests, and expectations of those responsible for making the change happen. The second part of a holistic communication strategy are the roles and responsibilities. Who's going to be responsible for making the change happen? The third part is your target audience. Who needs to know these updates? Is it just senior leaders? Is it just your specific execution team? Is it the entire organization? Are there some elements that maybe senior leaders need to know that others across the organization don't necessarily need to be bothered with? Next, what is the avenue you're going to employ to actually make the communication happen? Now, you can use a lot of different avenues. These could be email blasts out to the entire organization. These could be weekly or bi-weekly in-person meetings with your senior leadership, or these could be short in-person team meetings. Just understand what are the most effective and efficient avenues to communicate out all of these blocks. And then lastly, what is the frequency that you're going to make the communication happen? And as you think about that target audience, some audiences are going to need to have more frequent communication than others. So keep that in mind. And again, a really holistic plan is really going to understand and define that target audience and then the frequency that every target audience needs to be getting communication. So now that you have a better understanding of what a communication strategy entails and what goes into it holistically, let's dive into those 3 lessons. The first lesson is providing clarity to what success looks like. One of the most important questions to answer when you're embarking upon a change initiative is, what will the organization or business look like once we've achieved success? How will employees, team members be behaving? What will the metrics look like? Our revenue, our market share, whatever that change is involving, how would the organization be different once you know you've reached the change successfully? This question really should prompt the definition of both your quantitative and your qualitative success metrics. So the percent increase in revenue share, the percent, of volume that you're going to drive, the number of additional SKUs or reduced SKUs that you might see, as well as those qualitative metrics like employee behavior, how often certain behaviors are being done as opposed to not. You need to ensure that these success metrics are well integrated into your comm strategy. Ultimately, being able to express to your senior leadership and to your organization, when we are successful, here's what things will look like. By the way, you getting value from this? You digging it? You interested? Well, make sure you click subscribe, because I drop videos like this all the time, packed with value, things that will provoke you, that will get you thinking and in action, helping you to grow through your greatest change challenges. So make sure you click subscribe so you get notified when a video drops. All right, let's dive back in. Lesson number 2, consistency and regularity. Strive not to have your comm strategy or the communication that you're sending out only happen near the beginning of a change journey, and then maybe once or twice in the middle, and then at the end telling everyone whether you're successful or that you failed to meet your intended result. Strive to ensure what is the right frequency at which your communication, your messages should be distributed to your target audiences. And again, as I mentioned before, each target audience might enjoy a different level of frequency. I can remember when I was working with a Fortune 100 organization, nurturing them through a huge change they were having in their North American business. A lot of employees were impacted. I think 80% of their North American business was impacted by this big transformation. And I was working with their head of communications, and they were also responsible for leading change management. And I asked them, after they went through all of their change plans, how are you keeping the organization engaged and inspired as you move through this change? The number one answer, the first thing that came out of her mouth, was communication. Sharing communication on a regular basis. They thought there was no such thing as over communicating. Making sure that the organization was aware of the progress, what was expected of them, and what to expect next. When we're going through a lot of change, especially as an employee, when we feel like maybe the change just happened and we're being called to make it work even though we didn't necessarily ask for it, there's often more questions than answers. And that's when our anxiety can run really high. But when we're seeing a frequent drumbeat of communication, even if the communication is really streamlined, but we know, say every Tuesday, I'm gonna get an email blast sharing the progress of this big change initiative, that's gonna help quell some of that anxiety. So understand what is the right frequency to be sharing this communication, all those things I talked about in a holistic communication strategy. What's the frequency to share for each of your target audiences? Lesson number 3. This is a two-way street. This is probably one of the most important lessons that I've learned in working with clients all over the world, leading through really complex change. They're really laser focused on making sure the communication is dispersed out to the organization, usually from top to bottom. But sometimes they forget the value of opening up the window to have the organization share back to them. Communicate back to them what's working, what's not working. So ensure there's some area in your comm strategy where you're establishing an avenue for the employees, for the workforce, for the teams to share back what's working, what's not working, what they're struggling with, or maybe even their ideas, their perspective to make the change more effective and more efficient. This is such an important part of your comm strategy. I get amped up about this because so many organizations get this wrong. I was working with one company going through a huge transformation. They were splitting into 3 different companies. And their global comms team decided to integrate what they called listening sessions, where essentially what they were doing were setting up these Zoom calls and allowing a handful of employees to join. You'd have to sign up to do it. And then maybe 1 and 2 senior level executives would be in attendance. And the whole idea was simply for those employees to share what's working through the change, what's not working, what they're struggling with, what's on their top of mind. It allowed the employees to know that they're being heard and being understood, and it helped the leadership team in touch, in tune with how the organization was managing the change, knowing when certain things needed to pivot, when certain things maybe needed to slow down, or new resources or new things needed to be introduced in order to fuel the success of the change initiative. It's so important you're creating that space, creating those avenues to hear back from your team, back from the organization. Yo, did you dig that? Did you get value? I got something else for you, and it cost $0. If you're jazzed about change and want to learn more about how to fuel your own growth through it, as well as the growth of others, I'd like to offer you a free chapter of my best-selling book, Change Enthusiasm: How to Harness the Power of Emotion for Leadership and Success, specifically the introductory chapter to Change Enthusiasm. This growth mindset that arms anyone who practices it the ability to harness the power of emotion to fuel growth through big change and big disruption. I want to make sure you have the data, the research, and the insights to successfully fuel your growth through even your greatest change challenges. I'm Cassandra Worthy, and until we meet again, keep growing and keep rocking.